welcome to CX Today. My name is Charlie, and today I'm delighted to be joined by three excellent customer experience analysts to run through all the latest news coming out of Salesforce. Yes, today I'm delighted to be joined by Liz Miller, VP and Principal Analyst at Constellation Research, Rebecca Wetterman, CEO and Principal Analyst at Valois, and Michael Fawcett, Founder, CEO and Chief Analyst at Arian Research. It's great to have you all join me once again, and let's get right on to it. And maybe I'm going to start on quite a sour note here by discussing the recent layoffs of 1,000.
Way to go, Debbie Downer. Wow. Jeez.
Yeah, wow. I guess there's only one way to go from here, though.
But I think what's really interesting about this, though, is it's happening at the same time Salesforce is hiring more staff to sell Agentforce. I think it was 2,000 people they touted back in December. So to me, this maybe suggests that Salesforce is perhaps reorientating its entire business as perhaps maybe away from its traditional CRM and more towards this data and AI side of its business. But it would be great to hear kind of all of your takes on it. And I don't know, Liz, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that a lot of times Salesforce, like the volatility that we tend to see in Salesforce's workforce, that was a mouthful, tends to be in sales, right? And it tends to be as new solutions and in kind of new eras of the Salesforce selling machine begin to ramp up, you start to see the demand for a different type of seller. I do think that a lot of this flows into the idea that Agentforce really does take a very different type of technical knowledge with their sellers. This is not your typical, like, hey, just implement a cloud, like just bring on this solution. And,
turn it on,
hey,
it'll work fine.
You want to talk about service? You want to talk about marketing? Like the beauty of Agentforce and the promise of Agentforce is that, yes, it has these agentic pathways and workflows and automations, but it can also start connecting the dots across the Salesforce ecosystem and across the customer experience ecosystem, right? If you look at that bigger message and if you look at that bigger promise, that's what we're really talking about. So it's not about necessarily sellers who know how to sell MuleSoft, sellers who know how to sell Tableau. This is really, how do we bring on sellers who understand the work that is actually being automated and the technology that is doing the automation. And I do think it takes a little bit of a different seller to be able to do that. So I think that what we're seeing in the layoffs are, hey, we're eliminating some of these positions, but we're also simultaneously introducing these other positions. And I think Salesforce, what I thought was really interesting about a lot of the announcements around the layoffs is that they've been very, very specific about adding if your job was impacted, you can apply for another one of these jobs. And a lot of those internal folks get preference in kind of who gets first look. So I think they're really looking to try to keep good people. I think this was really more about how do we streamline some of these roles. I do think it's also indicative of what we're seeing across a lot of other massive organizations like a Salesforce, which is, while we've been looking at selling silos and looking at selling SKUs, we tended to organize our organizations around those SKUs and around those silos. And we're starting to see a lot of that kind of product-driven selling start to smooth out, where they're now looking at platform or suite-driven selling. And again, you're going to see a lot of individual jobs start to collapse and new jobs start to form in that sales motion. My big question is, when do we stop looking at the sellers who are selling SKUs like Agentforce? And when do we, is it now kind of time with something like an Agentforce that isn't just a set it and forget it, Ron Popeil chicken machine, right? It's something that constantly needs to be fed and constantly needs to be optimized, and we're constantly looking at processes. Is it time for Salesforce to go back and rethink and reassess its posture on customer success? Do they need to have a more formalized, a little more traditional, but put a Salesforce spin on it, kind of attitude towards customer success? Because right now they kind of look at customer success as, you got deployed, like here's success. It's service. It's ongoing access to knowledge and information. Your customer success is now driven by Agentforce. But are we actually going to need a team of specialized folks who are looking at delivery and growth? And is that the new motion that they start to look at from a revenue and a growth optimization perspective?
So I think you're absolutely right, Liz, about sort of the shift in the sales organization from I'm a Tableau salesperson
Right.
to I understand your business and I can show how these pieces fit together. I think you're absolutely right too about customer success, and this has got to be instrumented, right? The old sort of let's sit down and do a QBR and talk about how things are working doesn't work, and certainly doesn't work at scale. It's got to be, let me show you the dashboard that shows you exactly how many successful Agentforce interactions you had last month, in what areas it didn't work, where you need to tune, in what areas you haven't applied it yet, where you can get the most value, right? That absolutely needs to happen. But I think in terms of the layoff more broadly, I think we're seeing a point on the horizon where we have to think about not just salespeople, not just Salesforce, but for the entire workforce. How are we thinking about retraining and reskilling people for jobs that are going away, or large portions of task flows that are going away because of this AI-driven automation? And few companies have a good policy or plan in place right now to say, all right, Liz, you're not a Tableau salesperson anymore, but there are 3 adjacent opportunities in the organization where if you did this training or this reskilling, you would be an ideal candidate. So for not just Salesforce, again, and not just salespeople, but how do we look at the talent pool that's out there, those jobs that are definitely going away or definitely being diminished, and having an intelligent way to not just lay off of those people and have them reapply, but give them a path for growth that's within the organization where they already have a lot of institutional knowledge. And frankly, it's a lot cheaper to keep them in a productive role than it is to get rid of them and rehire and onboard somebody else.
There's probably a bot for that, or an agent
probably.
for that.
Well, Charlie, underneath this, you asked another question though, and I just want to comment on that a little bit, and that is Salesforce reorienting its whole business? And there's a funny anecdote. There was a rumor that Mark Benioff for a while wanted to change the name of Salesforce to Agentforce, so that should tell you something. And if you think about the trends, and I think this is kind of an interesting acknowledgement of where we're going. And by the way, I don't know if you saw, but ServiceNow also is hiring 1,000 or 2,000, I don't know, whatever, salespeople for the AI part of their business. But I think you're starting to see more and more commitment towards autonomous agents, autonomous systems, agency, all those, Agentforce things. And then the second thing is we know that, all the interaction with the systems over time is going to change and become a lot more natural and conversational. And it's just a different way of thinking about things because, as Liz said, you're not thinking about silos anymore. Because you don't have to. You're just simply interacting with a system that gives you the thing you need because you're asking about it and you want to, analyze this data or look at this thing or have it, answer this customer question or whatever. I think that's more. I think that's the message underneath this, that it is being reoriented, but then so are a lot of other competitors as well.
Yeah. And it's actually interesting if you consider like SAP, for example, now it's reorientated. It did put a huge program in place to reskill people. I know it's had some ups and downs, but
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of gave like a framework, I guess, for how some of this could work. But yeah, lots of.
But
really
it's
good...
also, I love the example that you give, right? Because SAP is a perfect example of an organization that had very much grown up in silos, very much had grown up in a SKU-based selling approach. And now here they are shifting and they're like, wait a minute, we have this huge motion in all of these kind of individualized kind of clusters of solutions. They call them rise and grow. Like it's very SAP language. Sorry about that. But you have these motions, right, where it's like rise is like the migration into cloud. You have grow, which is for net new customers that are moving forward. That isn't an S/4HANA sales guy, right? Like that's not, like that's not who's going to go in and sell that. But I think that organizations like SAP, organizations like Oracle, organizations who have deep, deep roots in what they've been very good at selling, like Oracle is a great example of that. Oracle has gone through those pains of like, they were very, very good at selling those on-prem solutions and ERP, and this is what you did. And they had to shift to figure out, how do we sell these services in the cloud? How do we sell OCI? How do we completely re-envision our tools and our solutions so that they're built on this cloud mechanism? it's funny to think of Salesforce as being in that same motion because they're like the new kid on the block. They're still like the young, Mark Benioff always likes to be like, we're the startup. It's like, you're a multi-billion-dollar startup.
Yeah,
Stop
that's
it.
a
They're
pretty
like,
big startup you got there, buddy.
we're a startup. And we have this giant building in the middle of San Francisco that dominates the skyline, but we're a startup. And I appreciate that they feel that way about themselves, but they are experiencing the same exact growing pains that you're seeing in those giants and in those lengthy stalwarts like an Oracle or an SAP. I think what's interesting about all of this, and it's a bit of like hashtag irony, while all the headlines focus on all the jobs that will be gone because of AI or thanks to AI, whichever way, where we're like, whichever side of the street you land on in that conversation. Isn't it funny that we're rehiring salespeople to sell those solutions? Like, it's kind of like this ultimate proof, like moments like this and conversations like this, it kind of comes back to this proof that people want to buy from people, right? And you still want to have that human interaction. Do I think that's always going to be the case? Probably not. Are we going to have a Salesforce update with Charlie and the giant plant in 10 years? That is going to say, hey, isn't it weird we're having to fire all these virtual agents? Like we probably are going to be that conversation, right?
Well,
I think it's worth noting.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's funny too to think about like what did Workday just announce? Oh, they announced a platform to manage digital workforce. Okay. Right. I mean, we're moving in that direction, and maybe someday my bot will buy from your bot, but today I'm still going to buy from you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, who knows in the future when the plant is reaching out across my face.
The plant's going to be interviewing us. It's going to happen. It's going to be here. It's a day. It's a day.
Absolutely. But I think that's covered the layoffs there very, very well. So let's maybe move on and talk about Agentforce a little bit more. Because I do want to know around the news story around the fact that Salesforce has already won 1,000, over 1,000 even Agentforce deals. That headline came out at the start of the month. But beyond that number, it'd be great to discuss maybe some of the use cases for Agentforce agents that are catching all of your eyes so far. And I don't know, maybe Rebecca, if you want to start on this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really interesting. And I think we'll hear in the earnings call next week a lot about sort of how customers are getting results with Agentforce. And it's been really interesting for me because I'm seeing a lot of initial sort of dipping their toe in the water with Agentforce that is not customer facing, but instead is employee facing, right? The idea is I want to be able to automate these things, but I'm focused on the employee experience first because A, it's something I can control better, and B, it's something that I can manage expectations better because I'm talking to my employees about it. So it's sort of the, requesting HR policy information or requesting days off or those sort of things where I'm not necessarily going to have a huge volume, but I have a control population that I can deal with. Right now, that being said, we're seeing some really, really interesting stuff with bringing in RAG for things like how do I enable self-service on complex product sets when a customer may be asking about fixing something where I may have 1,000 SKUs and I need the RAG and all that content to be able to determine which of the 1,000 products the customer actually has so I can give them the right instruction. Like that stuff is happening today and happening with a high degree of accuracy today.
Yep.
It's interesting because we just looked and found that if you look at what customers were trying to do with DIY versus what they're able to do with Agentforce, it's 16 times faster to get to productive accuracy with Agentforce than it is with DIY. So a lot of companies that spend a lot of time and resources and effort trying to get to something that was good enough to put out there now can get there in a fraction of the time and significantly greater accuracy sort of out of the box with Agentforce, which is great.
Yeah. Now, I think it's interesting, too, to think about the underlying problem. And I think you're right, Rebecca, the way to get past it. And that's the question of I'm going to use an autonomous system, but do I trust that autonomous system? And, today it's easy to go, okay, I'm going to do these internal use cases first because it lets me prove that out. It lets me build trust. It lets my employees build trust. And then I can take it into other parts of the business. Although I have talked to several customers in case studies around customer service, and you are starting to see some use cases there. But frankly, when I ask the question, most of them are proof of concept, pilot. It's pretty early. We're not, in full production yet or whatever. But also think about the timeline. I mean, when was Agentforce announced, and then how long have they had it in the market? And then when did they really start pushing and selling Agentforce 2? 2.0 just came out. I think it's just early, and we're seeing a lot of people play around with a lot of use cases, but it's going to be a while before that level of trust is there to just turn that thing on and have it go run and help my customers.
I think one of the things, and I totally agree with both Michael and Rebecca. I think what ends up happening here is that we're starting to see advancement in places that were already using automated processes for these types of engagements. They're now kind of being like, well, yeah, like customer service, contact center, we've been using these tools for a while now. It is not, you'd be hard pressed to walk into a contact center today and say, hey guys, there's this thing called an interactive virtual agent.
Yeah,
anyone want one? And have people be like, oh my God, what is that? I've never heard of an IVA before. And just because we're calling it Agentforce doesn't mean that it's something other than what we have been looking at and trying to fight to implement in our contact centers for quite some time. And there have been reasons why we didn't implement these types of solutions in our contact centers. And it largely had to do with both trust, adoption, and data. Right. And so the data availability and the data limitations that a lot of our organizations and a lot of our functional organizations have had has really been a limitation. And I think what Agentforce has kind of laid bare for a lot of organizations is that if you don't have that data foundation, and within Salesforce language, that translates directly into if you don't have data cloud. Right? If you are not a data cloud customer, you are going to find expanding Agentforce beyond a couple surface automations kind of difficult, right? You don't have to have data cloud to leverage Agentforce. You can deploy Agentforce on some of your automations, but they're going to likely very much be like individual user-based limited automations. It's going to be a lot of things around knowledge, because to Rebecca's point, you can focus it through a RAG technique, but you can also layer other techniques on top of that. You can look at cache augmented generation of a technique that actually loads all of that knowledge into your cache for faster retrieval. You can start looking at vector. You can start looking at knowledge graphs. You can look at graph-based retrieval. There are dozens of different techniques that we can now do to start to really focus these types of processes and focus this type of algorithm to look at a very limited source of data. But you're looking at a very limited source of data. You're not really unlocking the full potential of what this is and what this could be. So I think the interesting question for Salesforce is the momentum is undeniable, right? You went from an early start of maybe 200 paid deals to within a quarter and a half getting to 1,000. That's momentum, right? Like it's undeniable that that's momentum. But is that momentum off of customers who were already data cloud customers, who saw a quick POC and are now quickly rolling out to paid deals? What I'm going to be looking for, and I think to Rebecca's earlier point, we're going to start hearing about this and start digging and mining for this information in the next earnings call. How many new data cloud customers are there? Because we're going to have to see that data cloud customer arc begin to start going upwards if we want to keep seeing the momentum of Agentforce to keep going up. And we're going to need to see that data cloud go up in order to see the durability of Agentforce as a revenue driver for Salesforce. Because without it, you're going to have a harder time, or you're a very large organization that has resources within your organization that can instrument and can connect connect Agentforce to your own sources of data. Yeah. But how big is that population for Salesforce, right? So momentum is great. It is undeniable. It is a really quick start and it is really impressive. It's the durability and where the other requirements are going to go. That's what we're going to need to start seeing, because if we see data cloud level out, that starts to raise questions for me about how much longer this rapid rise of Agentforce can continue.
I mean, I will say, Liz, the one.
Yeah. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Sorry. The one thing I will say, though, you'll notice lately a lot of data automation data management, data quality tools, NetApp, Informatica, and a lot of small players too trying to come in. So, I mean, I do agree that data cloud is the simple way to solve this problem, and it's there. But I suspect bigger companies are going to see broader types of solutions and automation solutions that are going to bring in from some of the.
But does that leave
vendors
some of
that
their
come
core
back.
customer? I mean, like at the end of the
Maybe.
day, Salesforce's core customer is still that mid-market SM. Like,
Yeah.
who does that leave
Yeah.
behind?
Well, I
But
think the other interesting thing too is sort of where does the ecosystem go, right? Because a lot of the
Yeah.
customers I've been talking to have been talking about, to say it's more accurate. Well, what does that actually mean, right? Does that mean that the customer gets the answer that they want? Does that mean the customer was happy? Does that mean that technically the answer was correct? So the whole ecosystem of testing, of monitoring, of understanding the user experience with Agentforce, particularly when it becomes customer facing, becomes very interesting for folks like, user testing, where they're saying, let's look at, if I'm going to put an agent facing my customers at scale, I damn well want to know what the experience is going to be of that customer.
Yes.
Because once I turn it on, it's not like I realize I've had 10 interactions and something's not right. Right? This is like it's
Love that
potentially
example.
a rocket fuel on either a good or bad experience. So it's not just technically whether it passes a test of delivering a correct answer, but what that entire experience looks like from an end customer perspective. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see from a sort of testing, monitoring, management. To your point, Mike, Lattice has their digital employee management that they announced a long time ago. A lot of things like that are going to be out there for folks to say, how do I, test this for user experience before I put it out the door, but also manage that experience on an ongoing basis.
It's the ongoing stuff too. I love that it, like the capacity to be able to bring in something like a user testing that's going to be looking at that UI UX experience, right? And looking at that type of score while also hearing those customer voice verbatims, along with all the analytics around kind of digital body language and posture, right? Did they do what we thought they were going to do? And then being able to hear it's great that thing keeps popping up, and thank you so much for changing your whole homepage to just a prompt, but I'd really like something else. Like, do we have the capacity to listen to that and then be able to make those UI UX changes, on the fly in relatively short order? I think the interesting thing that brings up, right, is a lot of what we're talking about in the hype cycle that we're in, not just with Agentforce, if we're being very honest, right, but kind of the entire agentic, now your whole UX is a prompt kind of conversation that everyone wants to have, is it's very much a vendor-driven conversation of like, you should buy us, therefore your whole homepage can be a prompt, but we're not necessarily bringing in that user tester level, information. So the question then becomes, our teams, as much as we're deploying Agentforce and as much as Salesforce customers are moving in that direction, are they also bringing in new data sources like something like user testing, right? Are you laying that on top and bringing that in as part of your critical data analytics solution? Or are you using that in a silo? Like, are we getting into different silos around user and customer experience that got us into this spot to begin with? Right? The reason why we need so many agents is we had so many touch points, we can't manage the whole situation. So I think it just brings up new questions, but it brings in new opportunity. How are we looking at all of that telemetry, and how are we correlating that back to what our next agent does next?
Recognizing that this is not like a set it and forget it kind of thing, but it's really an ongoing.
Right. Anytime we could talk about chicken, anytime we could talk about that Ron Popeil chicken machine, right? Because it's set it and forget it. The part we forget, though, which always amuses me, is that Ron Popeil always had a pre-seasoned chicken before he put it in that machine. Charlie's looking at me like, what is a Ron Popeil chicken machine? It's this there was this old infomercial, Charlie, that it was this guy with a full studio audience, and he had this like automated rotisserie. And the value proposition was, you didn't have to spend all day toiling over the hot stove in the oven to make a perfectly seasoned, perfectly delicious, super moist chicken. You just put it in this Ron Popeil chicken machine, and it spun around and it cooked the chicken for you. And he would get the audience to shout, well, he'd stick the chicken in there, set it, and forget it. Like, you could walk away. You could go do all the rest of the things in your life. But the thing we always forget about that infomercial is that he was always sticking in a seasoned chicken. And then people would be like, oh, it tastes so delicious. Oh my God, it's perfectly moist. There's so much flavor. Yes, because he seasoned the chicken. We always forget that set it and forget it has a lot of runway before you set it, right? Before you can forget it. There are constantly things that you need to do to prepare the data, to season the data, to make sure all that goes in. And then you got to take the chicken out of the damn oven. Like, yeah, set it and forget it, but there's stuff that happens before and after. And I think that's the danger that we have with some of these things with Agentforce, is that if we think of it as set it and forget it, it's nasty chicken no matter how you cut it.
It's a great analogy. I've never felt so foreign during it, but
and you're probably lucky too.
It makes terrible chicken.
There's lots of really good stuff in there. Actually, it evolved into a great conversation about kind of the future of Agentforce, and it's going to be really exciting to see, especially the use cases actually that go beyond just sort of single departments, like beyond just the customer service team, beyond marketing, beyond HR or whatever, and just kind of see the whole enterprise using it and see the agents connecting the enterprise. But there is one final topic that I do want to talk about today, and that is the new AI energy score benchmarking tool that Salesforce also has built with the help of Hugging Face, Cohere, and Carnegie Mellon University.
Carnegie Mellon, yep.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Yep. Michael, I'm sure that you've looked into this one. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about the solution and why it matters?
Yeah, so it's interesting to think about this from a marketing standpoint first. Obviously, good press, good idea. But if you look at the trends, I think this is actually a really important tool. And this year we're starting to see more and more companies look at language models in a different way, right? So we started out, we had large language models, and everybody had to have one of those, and they're resource heavy and, takes tons of power to operate, to train, all these things. Well, all of a sudden, now we're going, well, what if we look at the use case and we size the model to match the use case? Maybe I don't need a large language model. Maybe I need a small language model. Maybe I need a medium-sized language model. Maybe I need an industry-specific language model. So all these different, ways to think of language models have changed, and going forward, companies are going to need to do that. And I think, why not have a standardized way to go, okay, this one is more efficient than that one, and it does all the things I need for my use case, so I'm going to save some money, I'm going to go that way. To me, I think it's a really useful tool, and it's good that, it wasn't just Salesforce, but there are a lot of other players involved here, including Carnegie Mellon, which, has a great reputation from a research perspective. So
I think this speaks to what Rebecca was talking about earlier too, Michael, is that it's going to be interesting where the ecosystem goes. This is a mini ecosystem, right? Because let's be very honest about this partnership play, right? And it's not Salesforce, Microsoft, Adobe, SAP coming together to create a standard score, right? It's Salesforce, a marketplace, and a model development and an AI solution.
Yep. And
going to a research entity to create this, right? And I know that sounds very cynical, and I don't mean it to sound that cynical as it was coming out of my mouth and back into my ear. But let's be honest. This is a very intentionally architected group where it is a complete ecosystem with these three of Salesforce, Hugging Face, and Cohere. These are synergistic partners who create that ecosystem of, we're the model, we've created the AI trust layer, because let's not forget that along with Agentforce comes the pre-incarnation, right? Like the preface to Agentforce was all of the trust layer and the orchestration layer and all of that, right? So you have the organization has the orchestration layer, you have the organization that's going to help you decide which model goes where and when, and then you have the model. So that ecosystem contained in the research of Carnegie Mellon is really smart. It's really smart that they went and did this way. It's really smart that this is where kind of the partner dollars went, and I applaud it. I think that yes, we have to be very aware of where this is going from a compute standpoint, from an efficiency standpoint, from where and how we shift and move all of these things. I think the question that I tend to have about it is, okay, where does the value then continue to drive? Because am I going to always find out that the model that's the most efficient and effective is the models that come from a certain ecosystem? And again, I just think that there are certain dangers in these types of scores and these types of in these types of looks. I think they're really smart, and I think that for organizations where this matters, it becomes a really, really important benchmarking tool. But as with all benchmarking tools, I'm not just going to pick on this one. I'm going to, let's pick on NPS, the ultimate benchmarking tool. The score is the score. The impact, the value of the score, the value of what Carnegie Mellon has identified here is how we improve the score, how the score changes over time.
Open to interpretation.
Exactly. And how that score drives better value for what we thought the value proposition was. So as an organization, it's great to have a score, but have you then put benchmarks against the AI energy score where you can say, in the course of 2 years, I need this score to go from this point to this point, because that's what optimal is. So what actions am I doing to get me to those new scores? Because just having a score, congratulations, you got a number. I mean, I hope there's a badge that goes along with it, but it's more going to be about why is that score important and what are you going to seismically change in your operations? What are you going to fundamentally do differently about those models, where they come from, how you're layering them, all of that, in order to change that score for your business outcomes.
Yeah, and would it be great to have an industry-wide sort of standard tool where you could plug in which platform you were using and what? Yes, but have we ever seen a global standards organization that wasn't incredibly political and unrealistic?
No.
Yeah. But I think it's raising a really important conversation. And the reality is that over the past, call it 2 years, we've spent a lot of resources, both energy and money, on understanding what we need to really get results from these models. And frankly, a lot of people were using chainsaws when they could have been using butter knives. Right?
Amen.
So how do we start to put some structure around thinking about that and some data around understanding that? So at least people are having, yes, a number, some points, but also a way to think about how do I move myself in a way that gets me the optimal results that I want, but is also the most resource efficient way.
Excellent. Again, lots of great stuff there. Lots of great metaphors as well today, which I've been enjoying.
This episode might need like an infographic guide. It's like...
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, we covered lots of good ground there in terms of the layoffs, the Agentforce deals, and also the benchmarking tool. So I think that's a great place to end today's chat. I want to thank all three of our excellent analysts for joining me today. And also thanks to everybody for watching too. Bye for now.